Schools matter, but they don't make a difference. Robert Plomin, 2018. Robert Plomin's latest book, Blueprint: How DNA Makes Us Who We Are, confirms the bold, if controversial, vision of the potential impacts of genetic research on education that he and his research team have been building in recent years. This presentation will discuss what this research means for schools, their students, and for parents. Psychology and the social sciences are comfortable with the notion that the environment can affect human development and the expression of our phenotypes, nutrition, early childhood experiences, play, socioeconomic capital, and the like. It is still, despite over a century of careful research, somewhat controversial to suggest that genetic factors, the genome, can influence our phenotypes. Plomin suggests that genetic factors are the dominant cause of differences between people. This conclusion is based upon a number of assumptions that could be tested experimentally. Plomin states that the heritability for school achievement is 0.6. This is quite a high figure. Many animal breeders select their animals for breeding programs using much lower heritability estimates. For example, there have been numerous studies of the heritability of milk production in cattle using estimates of heritability ranging from about 0.2 to 0.35. Heritability is a property of the variance of a population, not of any individual within the population. A heritability of 60% for school achievement refers to a heritability of 0.6 in a population being studied. It does not mean that for any one person in the study, 60% of their educational achievement is due to genes and 40% is due to the environment. This is an example of the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. It is an entirely inappropriate use of the statistics. The philosopher Evelyn Fox Keller has been critical of this and the whole nature-nurture debate. For her, the nature-nurture debate is about sorting out the contributions of nature from those of nurture and trying to estimate their relative importance. She argues that the question is meaningless because it is incorrectly framed. She also argues that it leads to statistical and philosophical misconceptions. Fisher's warning, which was present in the original paper in 1918, has not been heeded across the years, according to Fox Keller. Fisher warned clearly that we should not use loose phrases about the percentage of causation, which obscures the essential distinction between the individual and the population. Genomics allows a polygenic score to be calculated for individuals within the population. This is, at least in principle, a predictor of a person's educational attainment. You can see that at a population level there is a positive correlation between the polygenic score and educational attainment. A person with a 50% polygenic score has the potential to achieve anything from a GCSE grade U to a grade 9 in mathematics in the 2018 examinations. Even selecting only for grade 9, scores range from 15% to 75%. Most of those with the highest scores did not achieve level 9. One of the reasons for this, it is argued, is that GWAS only samples genetic variants from the genome, and there may well be many rare variants which contribute to educational attainment which were not included in the GWAS studies. However, heritability predictions from twin studies suggest that even if all the genetic variants were known, they would still only account for about 50% of the differences between people in the population. Therefore, can polygenic scores ever be used to predict an individual's educational attainment? So we seem to have a powerful tool which can be used for research, but not individual predictions. An example of it being used as a research tool is in this paper, which considered differences in exam performances between pupils attending selective grammar and independent schools and non-selective state schools, which looked at the influence of genetic and environmental factors. On the face of it, it looks as if there is no case to argue. The mean GCSE scores for non-selective state schools are about 1 standard deviation lower than for comparable grammar and independent schools. However, these differences largely disappear when genetic polygenic scores, socio-economic status, and the prior ability of the children are controlled. The mean edu years polygenic score for non-selective state schools is much lower than for selective grammar and private schools. If we look at the percentage of the variance for the different schools, educational polygenic scores account for about 8% of the differences. Socioeconomic status accounts for about 24% of the differences, and prior ability accounts for about 27% of the differences. And if we control for these factors, the differences between the school types disappears, so the grammars become 9.14, privates becomes 9.32, and state 8.96. However, there's an overlap of about 83% for polygenic scores between the distributions of the different kinds of schools. The paper is also very critical about school league tables, which rank schools from the best to the worst. There is such a considerable variation within each school. Some children in the worst schools outperform most children in the best schools. And the Ofsted ratings of school quality upon which these league tables are based explains less than 2% of the variance in GCSE scores when correcting for students' achievement in primary school. So the differences between these schools is largely caused by the selection of the students to get into grammar and independent schools, and on their prior attainment early on in their school career. Differences in teaching between the secondary schools is a relatively unimportant factor. Plomin is arguing that although schools matter, they don't make a difference between the scores of individual pupils in which genetics plays a part. He then goes on to say that no specific policy implications follow from these findings. But actually, many people disagree with his carefully calculated position. The right-wing commentator Matt Ridley, in common with other right-wing commentators like Toby Young, are arguing that genetic differences in polygenic scores represents a true meritocracy, and therefore they think that people will succeed or fail on the basis of their genetic potential. This illustrates how ideological positions affect how we interpret scientific data. If we accept the fact that genetic factors are contributing to the differences between people for educational attainment, then we need to also accept the fact that this is occurring within schools and also within the family environment, where the parents' genetic information is influencing the environment in which they create for their children. And the parents are responding to the children, and the children are responding to the parents. This is a form of gene-environmental correlation. There are a number of different kinds. The children evoke a response in their parents that reinforces positive behaviours. Children can actively choose environments that they find stimulating and supportive. And parents can choose for their children. All of these different factors will be interacting to influence a child's performance in school. We also need to acknowledge that schools matter because they create a safe environment in which children can develop in similar ways. It's not all about creating differences. Without healthy supportive schools, normal cognitive development in children will not occur. So schools really do matter. And the differences will not be expressed necessarily in the way observed in the study. There's more to education than simply GCSE scores. Personal, social, moral, cultural development, where schools really do matter for many children, are not considered in the study. The differences observed between people have a genetic component, which are concentrated and correlated with prior ability, prior achievement, and socio-economic status. The same genetic factors can be influencing all of these characteristics. The type of school that people go to is much less significant in their life outcomes than we might imagine, and is largely independent of the school's Ofsted rating. Individual predictions from polygenic schools will probably always be poor. And we need to affect that genetic and environmental factors do interact, both statistically and in the real world in the lives of the children. We are learning that it is almost impossible to interpret this kind of genetic evidence without using ideological lenses. And as Phelan points out, ideologies are themselves political devices. So it's inevitable that this kind of evidence will be used to try and predict and think about the kind of schools that children should go to. Should it be schools that are based on selection for prior attainment or selection for socio-economic status? Should there be schools where everyone attends but those who need them are given particular special interventions? Or should there be a new kind of school, so-called genetically sensitive schools, where children can learn to fulfill their genetic potential? That sounds wonderful, but what is a genetically sensitive education, and is such a thing possible?